For the best meat you have ever eaten in your life, go to samsbutchershop.com. Enter the coupon code Triple T when you check out for a 10% discount. Hello, everybody. Trailer Trash Tim. Thank you so much for joining me on this Monday. Let's get a big week kicked off. I have not yet discussed this past week's State of the Union address, and I want to touch on that now. I'll be honest with you, I did not have the tolerance to sit there and watch this bumbling, blabbering human give this speech. As I said before he gave it, what I thought the Republicans should have done was just not attend en masse. Nobody go. Mike Johnson not go. By the way, Mike Johnson has been an utter complete disappointment to me. You know, he sat there and agreed with a lot of what Biden said just by nodding. He didn't always stand up. But when Biden is talking about sending more money to Ukraine, Mike Johnson is sitting there doing this number, you know, as in, yeah, that's okay. We're going to do business with you. And I couldn't help but think, why did we get rid of McCarthy? I mean, just bring McCarthy back. How could it be any worse than this guy? This is not an improvement. Mike Johnson, you're not an improvement. But I just could not sit through the speech. But I have watched segments of it, snippets of it, enough to make you nauseous. You know what I'm saying? But I want to give you the conclusions that I've drawn from the speech. I've got 5 I want to mention. The first conclusion, the first point of the whole speech, apparently to me, was the occupant of the White House has made it very clear that as President of the United States, our number one priority is Ukraine. Not America, not the United States, nothing to do with the United States. Our number one priority, my fellow Americans, is Ukraine. That's our top priority. I can't think of any other more pressing domestic issue facing us. Can you? I mean, I'm scratching my head trying to think, is there anything else we need to be focused on, Joe? Is there any other pressing problem? I don't know. Could it be the border, maybe? Your inflation, maybe? Crime, perhaps? You know, I could just go on and on and on, right? But no, our number one priority, American, is Ukraine. Those of you that are in America watching me, you got to update your priorities. Our number one priority has to be Ukraine. There's nothing more important than Ukraine, and you need to get out there and work a little bit harder so that we can come up with more cash to send to Volodymyr Zelensky, because he just can't get enough of it. I mean, he's got to have the dough, don't you know? We've got to send more money to Ukraine, folks. That's what's the most important. That's the first thing I got from his speech. The second thing I got is that if Ukraine is the number one priority, then the 1A priority, or maybe number 2, the second most important thing in America, of course, is abortion. We have got to have abortion because, of course, there are forces in this nation that are doing everything they can to stop women from getting an abortion. And to stress this, a lot of the ladies in Congress, of course, wore all white to show their solidarity with abortion. You know, let me just say this from my heart, if I may. However you feel about abortion, you may be pro-life, you may be pro-choice, but here's something I don't understand at all. Even if you are pro-choice, why does there need to be this emphasis on abortion? I don't understand that. If a woman becomes pregnant in the United States, or a man for that matter, right? She can still get an abortion. She can still terminate her pregnancy. Despite what the Supreme Court did. You know, the Supreme Court did not outlaw abortion. The Supreme Court simply overturned a bad law, which was Roe versus Wade, as the late brilliant jurist Robert Bork once said. Roe v. Wade was simply bad law, and it never should have been heard by the Supreme Court. We had abortion in America. before Roe Wade, and now that Roe Wade has been overturned, we still have abortion in America. Now, personally, I don't agree with that. I wish we did not have abortion, but the fact of the matter is, we've always had it in one form or another, by one means or another. The injection of Roe Wade into the equation did not change that fact. There are states where it is harder to get an abortion, but there are states where you can still readily get an abortion if you so choose. But the point I'm trying to make is I don't understand this emphasis on abortion. Do you know, by contrast, in Russia, for example, the president of Russia, President Putin, actually rewards people for having large families? Did you know that? I forget the number. I used to know. I can't remember what the number is, but if you are a man and a woman and you live in Russia and you decide to start a family and you start having children, when you get to a certain number of children, I forget what it is, but you actually get paid by the government for having a large family. In other words, to have children in Russia is a thing that is lauded, applauded, and rewarded. Sometimes in America, you can see a family that has a lot of kids, and there are Americans that will look down on that, and they'll think, man, that's really weird. What's wrong with those people? Do they not know about contraception? I mean, how strange is it? Everybody knows you're supposed to just have a couple of kids and then call it quits, right? You know, my father was one of 14 children. I mean, they were always having babies. Did you know that our birth rate in America is on the decline? Do you know that if we heed the counsel of Joe Biden, our numbers are going to continue to decline as a nation? Did you know that's not healthy, nationally speaking? Do you know it's a good thing for a man and a woman to get married, start a life, start a home, start working together, and start having kids? A lot of kids. Did you know that's a good thing? Do you know in so much of America that is something that is demonized, but it ought not be? This is normal, folks. This is a good thing for men and women to get married and start families and have a lot of kids. That's a good thing. But Joe Biden demonizes such a notion, and he stands in the lectern and promotes the killing of future generations of America, the exact opposite of what he ought to be saying. Wouldn't you love to see a president stand in the lectern in Congress and say, hey, my fellow Americans, the future is bright. Go out there, find you a honey, get married, and start having babies. That's what you ought to hear from a president. That's normal. That's planning for the future. That's ensuring that your nation has a future. You know what you got to have for your nation to have a future? Babies. You got to have kids. You got to propagate. You got to keep the ball rolling. You know what I mean? And you don't do that by emphasizing abortion so much. It's just ass backwards. It's completely backwards. We live in such a culture of death, folks. We live in such a culture of death in America. It's just a shame. We're surrounded by death. The culture of death. It's in our art. It's in our music. It's in the streets. It's in the drug culture. It's in Washington. It is policy anymore. The culture of death. Hey, remember the old saying, choose life. Choose life. Don't promote abortion. Promote life. We need life. We need future generations of Americans, or we don't have an America. Or is this by design the fundamental transformation of America, where Native Americans, of which I am one, are displaced and replaced by a new generation of people pouring across our border illegally? Maybe that's how Joe Biden wants to transform the nation. The third conclusion I got from the SOTU speech was that Joe Biden's predecessor is evil. I believe he mentioned his predecessor 12 times, but never by name. But all the evil that is affecting America is all because of Joe Biden's predecessor. Joe Biden has done nothing bad for America. Everything he's done is good. Everything Joe Biden touches turns to gold. I mean, if we just keep things going the way Joe Biden has set things, you know, the first day he got into office, he reversed course and he put us back on the right track. And if we simply follow the Biden template, our future is bright. Perpetual inflation, which is another point that I wanted to draw. Number 4 that you draw from the speech is that corporations are evil. All American corporations are evil, and they are the source of our inflation. We have inflation, folks, because of evil corporations. That's right. I wonder how all those corporations that donated to Joe Biden felt about that. But all these greedy corporations are responsible for inflation, or his little term is, of course, shrinkflation. It's everybody's fault that we have inflation, but it ain't Joe Biden's fault. No, you can't, for all of our societal ills, you can't blame any of them on Joe Biden. None of them are his fault. And the 5th conclusion I drew, and the only thing I can stomach, the last thing I can stomach, is he finally mentioned Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley. Do you know who Lincoln Riley is, ladies and gentlemen? I'm going to tell you who Lincoln Riley is. Lincoln Riley is the head football coach, formerly of Oklahoma and now of USC, the University of Southern California. His name is Lincoln Riley. So Joe Biden still, to this day, has not mentioned the name of the deceased nursing student, Lincoln Riley. He has still not said her name. He said the name of the USC football coach, but he didn't say the name of Lincoln Riley. And of course, he mentioned the fact that she was murdered by an illegal alien, but he was quick to say, but there's a lot of people murdered by non-illegal aliens. Well, thank you, Joe. That makes us all feel a whole lot better. That just really is such a source of comfort, I'm sure, to the parents. To know, to hear you say, well, we have a lot of people get killed in America and they're not killed by illegal aliens. Well, thank you, Joe, for just crystallizing everything into an understandable form that now it all makes sense to us, Joe. Thank you. That just makes us feel so much better. And golly, why don't we just let this guy go so he can go wreak a little more havoc? That'd be okay with you, wouldn't it, Joe? All right, let me get off of that train wreck of a disaster and move on to Robert DeNiro. Robert DeNiro. I first encountered Robert DeNiro on the big screen when I was in college, when I went to see a troubling but very well-made film called The Deer Hunter. Later, I would see him in The Godfather, Part 2, I believe it was. And I thought Robert De Niro was a fabulously talented actor. Unfortunately, as the years rolled by, you started to peel back the curtain and look at the personal side of Robert De Niro. You got to see the real Robert De Niro, and it's not the kind of guy that I would want to be in a fishing boat with. Let's just say that. Robert De Niro recently appeared with another lunatic by the name of Bill Maher for an interview. And of course, the subject of Donald Trump came up. And Bill Maher asked Robert De Niro his thoughts on Donald Trump. And this is what De Niro said, and I quote, "There's nothing redeemable in him. If he wins the election, you won't be on this show anymore. He'll come looking for me," De Niro said. Now, there's more to say about this, but, well, let me get with what how Maher replied. Bill Maher said he agreed with DeNiro and said, I said from the very beginning that this guy isn't going to concede power, and he still hasn't. He still hasn't admitted he lost the election, and he advertises that he will go on. He says he's been cheated out of one term, so maybe he'll get rid of the president's only get 2 terms thing. A couple of things I want to point out. First of all, Mr. DeNiro said if he gets back into power, that will be Trump. He points at Maher and says, you won't be on this show anymore. Did Bill Maher have a show during the first term of Donald Trump? That would be correct. Yes, he did. Did Trump shut Bill Maher down? No, he did not. Could he have shut him down? No, he could not. Do you think if Trump could have done such a thing, he would have shut Bill Maher down? No, he wouldn't have done that. But he would also have shut down The View, would he not? And CNN, would he not? And LSDC, would he not? But he didn't. So that's a lie. It's just typical Democratic nonsense. This calling Donald Trump some kind of an evil dictator. Folks, if you want to find a dictator, look no further than the current occupant of the White House. It wasn't under Donald Trump that a real credible journalist doing a report on the J6 prisoners still rotting in prison in the shadow of the White House was placed under arrest. That would be under Joe Biden, not Donald Trump. It wasn't under Donald Trump that the Department of Justice called Tucker Carlson and said, if you go over to interview Vladimir Putin, you're going to be subject to arrest. Now you tell me who the dictator is. Is it Trump or is it Biden? Now, Maher goes on to say this to Robert DeNiro. He said this, and I quote, the governor of New York is putting the National Guard in the subway. As a New Yorker, what do you think of that? What would they say if Trump did it? To which Robert DeNiro replied, well, if he did it, it's for another reason. Let that sink in for just a minute. Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, is placing National Guard troops in the subway to maintain law and order. And this is what Bill Maher was asking Robert DeNiro. You know, Governor Hochul is sending troops, National Guard troops, to the subway to keep law and order. What would you say if Trump did that? To which DeNiro said, well, if Trump did it, it's for another reason. Can you believe the blatant, flagrant hypocrisy here? What do you draw from this? Simply this. If a Democrat sends National Guard troops to the subway to maintain law and order, that's okay. But if Trump did it, my Lord in heaven, you'd never hear the end of it from people like Robert DeNiro. If Trump sends the National Guard to the subway system, well, then don't you know Donald Trump is a dictator. But if Kathy Hochul does it, well, that's just fine and dandy. It's no problem if a Democrat does it. It's impossible for a Democrat to be a dictator. It's impossible for a Democrat to be a racist. It's impossible for a Democrat to be anything bad in the world, the demented world of demented DeNiro. But if Trump were to do such a thing, you would never hear the end of it. I would remind you, it wasn't Donald Trump who sent National Guard troops to the New York City subway. It was a Democrat. The governor of New York, Kathy Hochul. You got that? Let that register. Let that sink in. You tell me who is the dictator. Now, I want to say another word because I touched on this last week about sending troops into the New York City subway system to maintain law and order. And I had somebody comment last week on that video where I was talking about that it was essentially, forgive me, I forget who said it, but they were saying essentially this is not good. This is a bad precedent to send the National Guard to deal with a domestic situation. And I wish I had addressed that last week because I glossed completely over that and I didn't touch on it. So let me do so now. Because I agree that the National Guard should not be used for domestic situations. I do not agree with Governor Hochul sending National Guard troops to the subway to maintain law and order. Now, is there rampant crime at the subway? Yes. Is there rampant crime in New York? Yes, absolutely. How should that crime be dealt with? I'll tell you how. The same way former Mayor Rudy Giuliani dealt with it, by allowing the New York City Police Department to do their damn job. That's how you deal with it. And you might think with a former police officer, now as the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, he would understand that. But because crime has gotten so bad in New York City, because the subway system is so infested with criminals, and New York City Mayor Eric Adams, the former cop, won't do his job, the governor of New York said, well, hell, I got to do something. So she sends in the troops. Do you see where the problem is here? This sets a bad precedent. I'll tell you why. Let me flesh this out a little bit. If the American people got accustomed to seeing National Guard troops deployed to maintain law and order in domestic situations, that's got a real third world banana republic dictatorship strain to it, don't you think? You know, the Army, the military, was never designed to be deployed for domestic situations. This is why we have police forces, so they can deal with such things. Is it possible the Democrats would like for us to become comfortable with the deployment of the military in domestic situations? Think about that. Think about that for a minute. Let that roll around in your noggin for a minute. What if it were the case that we routinely saw branches of the military deployed on domestic soil to deal with domestic situations? Can you understand how that's a bad precedent? Now, let me quickly draw a distinction to the border. I do not have a problem with sending National Guard troops to the Rio Grande River, because that is not a domestic situation. That is an international situation. That is a border security issue. We can't maintain law and order domestically in our towns and in our cities, in our counties and our states, if we have an invasion going on at the southern border. And the invasion should rightly be repelled with military force. That's how you solve that problem, folks. You go down there with some firepower and stop it. I could solve the problem in one day. Something Greg Abbott has not done in all of his years as governor of Texas. All right. Enough of you, Robert De Niro. I'm done with you. I don't want to see any more of your movies either. All right, let me move on to, I got to touch on a man who has completely lost his mind, and I'm talking about MSNBC host of Morning Joe, Joe Scarborough. Joe Scarborough, years ago, was a congressman from the largely conservative area of Northwest Florida, the panhandle of Florida. And I can remember that back then. I didn't have intimate knowledge about Scarborough, but he was a Republican, and judging him by his rhetoric, he seemed like a fairly reasonable person. But something happened to Joe Scarborough. I don't know what happened to Joe. I don't know if he was in an accident. I don't know if he fell down a flight of stairs and banged his head. Something happened to Joe Scarborough which caused him to have a complete 180 mentally, philosophically, politically. And years later, here he lands on MSNBC, this bastion of left-wing lunacy, where he hosts a show called The Morning Joe. And he is now a rabid liberal who would make Bill Maher blink It's unbelievable what's happened to this guy. This past week, Joe Scarborough was talking about Joe Biden, and I want to tell you what he said about Joe Biden. If you can believe what I'm about to tell you, I'm going to give you a direct quote from good old Morning Joe. This is what he said, and I quote, of Biden. That guy's mental state. I've said it for years now. He's cogent, but I undersold him when I said he was cogent. He's far beyond cogent. In fact, I think he's better than he's ever been, intellectually, analytically, because he's been around for 50 years. Start your tape right now, because I'm about to tell you the truth, and F you if you can't handle the truth, unquote. That is Joe Scarborough, who wants you to believe that Joe Biden is not only cogent, no, he's far beyond cogent. He's actually better than he's ever been, intellectually and analytically. Joe Scarborough, what on earth has happened to you? Have you heard? He said this, folks, after the State of the Union address. He said this after the SO2U address. He said Joe Biden was cogent. He said he's sharp. He's far better intellectually, analytically. Joe, what are you smoking, dude? Did you watch the speech? Is there another Joe Biden you're talking about that I don't know? Somebody grab a straitjacket for Joe Scarborough. He's lost his mind. One more thing before I go. I want to talk about a woman by the name of Kim Ogg. O-G-G. Kim Ogg. Kim Ogg is the Harris County District Attorney. Harris County is Houston, Texas. Last week, Kim Ogg, the District Attorney, went into Love Park Community Center last Tuesday to vote, right? Last Tuesday morning, she goes into the Love Park Community Center to cast her vote, to cast her ballot for her own primary race. Only to be told, ladies and gentlemen, that someone had already voted in her name. Kim Ogg presents her ID and says, "Hi, I'm Kim Ogg, and I'm here to vote." Only to be told, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but Kim Ogg already voted." But look at this. I'm Kim Ogg. This is me. I'm Kim Ogg. I haven't voted yet. "Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. According to our records, you've already voted. You can't vote again, you know. That's against the rules." Nah, there's no voter fraud in America, ladies and gentlemen. What are you talking about? Everything's copacetic. Everything's hunky-dory. Except maybe not for Kim Ogg. How many Kim Oggs do you think there are in America right now? 10 or 12 maybe? Maybe at that precinct. Hey, listen, give me a thumbs up for the video if you would. I would appreciate it. Subscribe to the old Triple T channel if you have not yet. That would be fantastic. And give me your comments down below. I really would love to hear what you all have to say. Marina and I are hitting the road. We're going on a little jaunt. We're going to hitch up the camper and go for our first camping trip of the season. But we're bringing you with us. We're bringing the old camera. And we'll be checking in with you and trying to upload stuff. I hope we have good Wi-Fi in the campground so we'll get stuff uploaded. But I got a couple of tricks up my sleeve. Go out there, have a great day, everybody. Let's keep it real, keep it great. And remember, if you're young and pretty, go get married and start having babies. Trailer Trash Tim, over and out.